Good afternoon. I'm here today with my longtime friend, Jay Deratany, who has had a legendary career as a trial attorney and evolved from that. I'll say evolved, but he's still very much lawyering. But he blossomed into, let's say it that way, a playwright and a screenwriter as well. His trial record includes record verdicts, including eight-figure awards in foster parent abuse cases. So, Jay, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Marcus. How are you?
I'm doing well. And I want to tell the audience that I have known Jay for a long time, and I happen to know Jay's family. So I'd like to begin at the beginning with that. You know, we all come from a background and a family. How did your family influence what later became your career and all of the interests you've blossomed into?
Well, first I have to give a plug to you because you are our family attorney and one of the inspirations. You're a few years older, but you, as I was in law school, we had hired you for matters, and you were always the exemplary lawyer. So I really, my hat's off to you, Marcus.
Appreciate that.
Yeah, of course, it's truth. So I think that my family's influence is basically that my dad gave me a real sense of hard work, and my mom. They were a hard-scrabble family from Detroit, Michigan. My dad was a restaurant owner that made it to the 8th grade. My mom made it to the 10th grade. Children of immigrants. They worked their way up, and I was the first of 6 kids to go to school, college, and then let alone then afterwards I went to law school. And I think one of my best days was when I took off my cap and gown at the graduation and put it on my dad. And
it's wonderful.
Just the work ethic that he put in me, I think is insurmountable, especially as a trial lawyer. You know this, Marcus. You have to work hard. You have to work much harder than the other side to win a case. You can have all the facts and evidence, but you got to make sure the jury hears every fact. You've got to make sure you put it in the order that's understandable. And you've got to go over and over and over again your opening statement, your closing arguments. All the nuances of being a lawyer really start with and end with hard work.
Well, let's dive right into your career as a lawyer that is founded on that hard work. You know, you began your career cutting your teeth on, is it fair to say, garden variety cases, but it soon became a much bigger, a much more, impactful practice. And so my question to you is, how did that happen? How did you go from, sort of the garden variety cases to doing something at a scale that it's national?
Well, I actually started in legal aid, and I was going to be happy being a legal aid lawyer. But back in the late 1980s, when I first became a lawyer, they put a hiring freeze on employees of legal aid. So I was making $8 an hour, and I couldn't eat. I was literally eating, what were those called? Those cheesy boxes, Kraft macaroni and cheese.
Right.
And I had loans to pay and so forth. So I wound up working for a very well-respected plaintiff's lawyer, and I continued to work with him for 5 or 6 years, and then realized that I could both do good and make money and be a lawyer that I wanted to be. So I became a trial lawyer on behalf of victims of injuries, and later developed into a lawyer for children.
And, you became that advocate for children, and along the way, you had some very large verdicts. How did you learn how to do it?
I think I had a good base of knowledge with the law firm I worked with. I worked with a skilled trial lawyer who's since retired. He was very hard on me. I would work till 11, 12, sometimes 3 in the morning. And this was in the days where, they were a little bit tougher than they are now. I don't think I could work my associates or law clerks as hard as he did me. But I thank him for it, because after that 5 years of internship, so to speak, or being a young novice, I then just start trying cases. And I think the best experience is learning along the way. That's kind of what my book talks about, is the mistakes you make. So I made a lot of mistakes along the way. And as a lawyer, you learn by continuing to work cases. I've taken cases where I shouldn't have taken cases. I've hired an expert that I didn't think wound up being so great, and all of that. And you keep trying cases, and you keep putting your foot forward, and you take risk as long as your client's okay with that risk and you go for it. And I think it's a combination of education, but also experience in the training, and you just keep working at it. And again, I got to come back as a trial lawyer. I don't think anything is more important than working harder than your opponent.
Well, you use that hard work to make some impactful changes, and particularly in the foster parent arena, you've had some very large resolutions recently. So I'd like to expose the audience to that. I understand you had a recent large settlement of a foster parent abuse case, if I'm getting that right. Can you tell the audience a little bit more about that and how you just got into that area in particular?
Yeah, actually, it was a verdict of $46 million.
A verdict.
A verdict for a case involving a child who was abused in the child care or child welfare system. I was doing medical malpractice, and we still do that. My law partner is an expert on that, and we continue to work on medical malpractice. Our firm has other cases, but about 20 years ago, a woman came into my office, a lovely woman, and her children, unfortunately, had been abused by a child that they brought into the home, and the corporation, the child care corporation, didn't tell that woman that this young man had a history of sexual violence and violence. And at first, I didn't even know what theory do we travel under, as they say in the law.
Right.
Is this a negligence case? Is it willful and wanton? Is it something different? Is it somewhat of a contract case? So I researched it. They filed motions to dismiss, not to get into the weeds on that. Lots of motions to dismiss, summary judgments, and then we finally got to verdict on that case, which was the highest at that point. And that was actually a settlement of 20-some million. And then I went on to write some articles. I thought I would explore and advise other attorneys how to handle these type of cases, foster care negligence or child abuse cases. And then I wrote a few articles and got more cases, and that led up to the case called Hudson, in which I won the largest verdict for a foster care negligence case. And that involved a boy who was beaten repeatedly by his very mentally ill mother, and the agency, and I say agency because they're private corporations that have contracts with the state. And when they have contracts with the state, Marcus, they're supposed to follow the rules that are set forth in a contract. For example, visiting the home twice a month, or reporting signs and symptoms of abuse. But when they don't go to the home for 6 months or a year, or they ignore obvious signs of abuse, that's when there lies a civil action for their negligence in failing to do what they were supposed to do with the contract with the state. We pay them as citizens of the state or the county to take care of kids. And unfortunately, all over the country, and we're seeing this, there's a Netflix show right now about it. There's so much abuse in the foster care system because some of these private companies, some of them for-profit private companies, are making a lot of money from the state and the county, and they're not doing their job. And that's what I want to expose.
And this ultimately led in part to your film career. You are the screenwriter, if I understand, for a movie known as Foster Boy, right?
That's right.
Well,
see it on Amazon or Amazon Prime. So.
That's right. And for those that haven't seen the movie, can you tell the audience a little bit about that project?
Yeah. After my other passion in life has always been writing. And at some point I wrote, and I like human interest stories or human rights stories. And I wrote a story about two young men who were killed in Iran. It was the first play, and I won a GLAAD nomination. And so I came out to LA, and somebody said, you ought to go back to school for this. And so as a 50-some-year-old man, or maybe late 40s, I went back for my Master of Fine Arts in writing. And so that became my second passion. I didn't imagine the two worlds would intersect, Marcus, but at some point I was writing for one of my professors, and he said, this isn't very good. Write what you know. I said, well, I know law, and I know these foster care cases, and that's what impassions me. And he said, write that. So I did, and I thank John Schimmel to this day, and I wrote and rewrote, because writing is rewriting, and it's a combination of about 3 or 4 of the cases I've handled, which particularly bothered me, that cases in which children were taken advantage of in the foster care system by these corporations that, in my view, are putting profit above kids. And hopefully this movie sort of exposes that. I don't want to tell you how it ends, but it's a fictionalized story based upon a few of my cases.
You know, you mentioned the tie, if you will, between the law and your writing, which begs for me the question of, you know, is there a crossover or a tie, if you will, between storytelling in the trial setting versus, you know, movie and play projects? Is
Oh,
there?
you know that as a litigator.
I do, but help
The,
the audience understand that tie a bit better if you can.
yeah, absolutely. You know that the first rule of a trial lawyer should be a good storyteller. Matter of fact, that's rule number 1 in my book. So, and you haven't read a draft of it yet, so I haven't finished it, but I'll send it to you. So that was prescient of you. But you know that as a litigator yourself, you have to tell a good story. You have to tell a story that's accurate and truthful, but you have to also tell your client's viewpoint, and you have to engage the jury. If they get muddled in facts and figures and they don't understand what's going on, and they don't also believe that your client is deserving of a verdict based upon the story you tell, you're not going to win. So, there is a natural crossover between being a writer and being a storyteller in a trial setting. In fact, I would say you really do everything in a trial, don't you? You're the director as a trial lawyer. You're the writer. You're writing the exams and you're opening and so forth. And you certainly have an audience. You have 12 people, smaller audience in a film, but they're there to say thumbs up or thumbs down.
And is it fair to say there's archetypal characters as well? You know, you have the villain, right?
Yeah.
And so you cast your opponent as the villain. You always cast the client as the hero in the story. Is that always the archetype?
It's tough because, even in movies, not everybody who is the protagonist is the hero, likable. And sometimes you have a client. I had a client who, in a medical malpractice case, and she was very upset that her husband died. He was waiting 12 hours in an emergency room, and it was pure malpractice. And when I said, "What do you hope to get out of this case in front of the jury?" she surprised me and said, "I don't give a damn about this case or this jury." Same with the foster care case. I had a young man who was abused in the system, and he said, "I don't give an F about the jury." And you had to tell the story in spite of that, because these people were hurt. They were abused by the system. They didn't trust the system. But the interesting thing, and I think you know this, Marcus, juries get it. Juries get it usually. They see between the lines and they see the story for what it is, the truth of the story, the heart of the story. And they knew that young man in the foster care case was angry. And again, without telling you too much about the movie Foster Boy, there's a lot of that in that movie. There's a lot of anger with kids who have been abused physically, emotionally, or they've experienced that type of abuse by the foster care system, and so they don't have trust. They don't have trust in the system, and
Right.
So you tell the story. But with the foster care cases and the child abuse cases, it's much easier to cast them as villains because, in my view, and maybe I'm a little biased here, the workers aren't the villains. The case workers, the social workers, so forth. But the system and what they're setting up. Some of these CEOs and executives from these big companies, that even these non-for-profits, are making millions on state contracts, and they're paying their caseworkers $10, $12 an hour, and they're overwhelmed and overworked. So the villain is the corporation often. And I'm a capitalist. I believe in making money, and I believe in a good product, but my view of child is not a product.
Let me ask you this. There's this idea out there in the case law. I think it's called the apex doctrine, where the courts have made it difficult to depose the CEO. But in the past, I've had the opportunity to depose CEOs. I mean, have you had that opportunity in your cases, and it hasn't been impactful if you had?
Yes, one story comes to mind. I had a CEO, and I won't tell you the company because I think I've got a non-disclosure agreement because they settled. But the head of this company had to walk to the deposition, and I realized, and he was the CEO, and I realized after a while that he smelled of alcohol. And sure enough, we did a little background check, and he had a couple DUIs. So his license had been taken away. And this was who was running a non-for-profit foster care company. Again, I can't say the name, but it's just incredible. Yeah, they often insulate themselves from liability as much as they can, but you just have to keep working at it. And that doctrine is ridiculous, frankly, because they should be held liable. Not even just and another thing, if we're talking about the Apex doctrine, they also hide that they have insurance, and so they try to make it look in a courtroom like they're a non-for-profit and they are serving people, yet they have millions of dollars of insurance, $80-100 million of insurance to cover it. So not a dime will come out of their pocket. But these are the games that they play, unfortunately.
Yeah, yeah. So Jay, we've talked about your law practice, which is still ongoing, and I understand you're still a current creator in the movie and play space. So do you have a current movie project?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, a very fun story, and this takes us a little bit out of the law, but it still involves human rights, and this involves the rights of people with disabilities, which, as you know, as plaintiff's lawyer, we represent people with disabilities, people who have been injured or hurt or psychologically damaged,
Right.
in the case of child sex abuse and so forth. But in this case, it's a young man. His name is Caden Cox, and we have the rights to a story, and it's on ESPN and so forth. But he is the first football player with a disability, specifically Down syndrome. And he's a wonderful young man, and he played for a college in Ohio called Hockney, and he's currently at Ohio State University, and he's in the football program, and we're hoping that he gets some play time. That'll depend on Ryan Day and the coaches there, but we're currently writing a story, and we're close to disclosing who our director is, and maybe a main star. And Caden is a wonderful young man who overcome so many odds to become a very good kicker, scored many points at Hockney and hopefully will at Ohio State, and is really an inspiration to all of us of what somebody can do.
Yeah, yeah. Let me ask you this: are there any other stories you're itching to tell that you can think?
I think as a lawyer, I just look back at my 30-some years of practice, 35, I think it is now, and there's so many funny stories that we all come across. I'm sure you have too, Marcus. And so many life lessons. So I'm currently I have a publisher now who asked me to write a book about the lessons of a trial lawyer. So I have a book coming out, and I think it's going to be called 75, I haven't figured out the number of rules, but 75 Lessons of a Trial Lawyer. And it's really for both the public and the young trial lawyer or trial lawyers generally. It gives them a rule or lesson. Don't do something that I did. Make sure you do this. Make sure you hire the right experts. And it gives them these practical tidbits of advice, but it's surrounded by an anecdote, a story of how I learned that rule. And sometimes they're very fun. For example, when I first started in practice and I was a young lawyer, I actually represented many young men and women who were, you say, prostitutes. So I have some funny stories of going to court to defend them and making a few dollars there, and going to traffic court the first year, and then working my way up from there to learn the skill and hone my capabilities and try to be the best trial lawyer I can for everybody. Everybody deserves a lawyer. That's the beauty of our country. And I do believe in the jury system, and I think there's some fun stories along the way that I have, and then there's some sad stories, and it's reflective of America. It's reflective of our society, and I think that's a lot of good.
Before we did this, we talked for a moment about a tie between your book, your upcoming book, and the book Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance.
Yeah.
Can you expound on that a bit? What tie is there between this work and Robert Pirsig's book?
I've got to go back and read it, but it was one of the most influential books I read as a young teenager. And then I think I read it again in my 20s. And now that I'm 60, I'm going to read it again. Hopefully, I think what's so beautiful about that work and his writing is that he talks about taking the time. In today's society, we are so busy. I have a 14-year-old son, and I think he's taken his son who's about the same age, maybe a little younger, and he's teaching them just something simple about maintaining a motorcycle and going across the country, and life lessons come from doing things simply. And that applies to being a trial lawyer in some ways. Sometimes we lawyers overcomplicate things, but simply letting the jury know the facts, letting the jury, letting your witness tell the story in their way, and taking a moment and being present. And I think that's the most important thing about Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. Being present. If you have a couple hours with your son, for example, or an hour at a time during the day, don't be on your phone. Don't be doing something else. Be present. I think that book is more important now than it's ever been. So, especially with all the distractions we have. So when it comes to being a trial lawyer, be present in the case. Don't take another call while you're listening to your client. Don't have 50 things going on while you're preparing your examination. Be in the moment. I think then you'll, in life, be in the moment. If you're getting married, take a moment, step back and realize where you are. If you're holding your wife's hand or your partner's hand and you're walking down the street, that simple act is something that should bring you great pleasure. Don't think about where you're going to eat or who's bothering you or something else. Just think about the fact that your hand is holding that person's hand that you love. And I think that should carry us through in law and in life.
Yeah. Jay, I don't know that I can ask any more questions that would bring us to a higher note than the place you just brought us to. So I'd like you to tell the audience how they can contact you or your firm if they wanted to ever follow up and perhaps retain you or your partners or work with you in some way.
Or maybe be an extra in one of the movies.
That's right.
Which we will have in Ohio. I think in this fall we'll be filming.
Right.
But my website's called lawinjury.com, and I'm at JP Deratany at lawinjury.com. And I always take the time to talk to potential clients or somebody in my staff if I'm on trial to, even if we don't think we can take the case, to at least try to get them in the right direction or help them out. Because I think as lawyers, we're also counselors.
Right. We'll put this information up on the screen for you. But Jay, it's been a real pleasure. We could go on for quite a while, but I'm hoping.
Always love talking to you.
Yeah, so good. So I think that's it. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, Marcus.